Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when the illusion of my marriage began to crack. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Just a shift in routine, a minor deviation from the life I had built with Claire. But in hindsight, it was the first domino in a chain reaction that would eventually bring my entire world crashing down. Claire and I had been married for 8 years. We were the couple that people admired, the ones who seemed effortlessly in sync. We traveled, we laughed, we built a home together that felt warm and secure. Our friends often joked that we were the gold standard of marriage. I had believed it, too, until the day I didn't. It started with small changes, the kind that are easy to brush off at first. Late nights at work became more frequent, though Claire had never been the type to bring work home with her. She started paying more attention to her appearance. Not in a way that was drastic, but enough that I noticed. New outfits, an increase in perfume use, a heightened interest in the gym when she had always preferred yoga at home. I told myself I was overthinking it. We all evolve, change our routines, pick up new habits. But the part of me that had never questioned my marriage before now couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The first real red flag came when I suggested a weekend away. Claire had always loved spontaneous trips, but this time, she hesitated. She offered a weak smile, an excuse about deadlines at work, and a promise that we'd plan something soon. It was the first time she had ever turned down the opportunity to travel together. Doubt crept in, quiet but persistent. I wasn't the kind of man to snoop. Claire and I had always respected each other's privacy, never feeling the need to check each other's phones or emails. But trust isn't about never checking, it's about never feeling like you need to. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt like I needed to. Her phone was always within reach now, even in places where she used to leave it unattended. When she texted, she angled the screen away from me, as if protecting a secret. One night, long after she had fallen asleep, I stared at her phone resting on the nightstand. My heart pounded as I reached for it, hesitating before my fingers brushed the screen. The logical part of me warned against it. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to violate the trust that had always been the foundation of our relationship? But another part of me, the part that had been growing restless with unease, whispered that I already knew the truth. I just needed confirmation. The phone was locked. A new passcode. That was confirmation enough. From that moment on, I couldn't ignore the signs. The late nights weren't just late nights. The change in appearance wasn't just a phase. Claire's enthusiasm when she was home felt forced, as if she were overcompensating for something. The worst part wasn't just the possibility of her betrayal. It was the fact that she had once been the person I trusted above all else. And now, she was the source of my growing paranoia. I had built my life around her, believing that we were different, that we were unbreakable. But the cracks were spreading fast, and I had no idea how deep they ran. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than suspicions. If I was going to accuse my wife of betraying me, I needed undeniable proof. So I did what I never thought I would do. I started watching her more closely. I paid attention to her schedule, to the way she interacted with me, to the moments when she seemed distant. I memorized the patterns of her excuses, the inconsistencies in her stories. And then I took the next step. I placed a small tracker on her car. It was discreet, something she would never notice, something that I told myself was necessary. It felt wrong, but not as wrong as the way she had started lying to me. The first few days yielded nothing suspicious. Work, gym, occasional drinks with colleagues. Everything seemed normal. I almost convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that my fears were unfounded. Until the night she told me she was working late and the tracker showed otherwise. She wasn't at her office. She wasn't anywhere near it. She was at a hotel. I sat in my car outside the hotel, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The neon sign buzzed above me, indifferent to the storm raging inside my chest. I could see the entrance clearly, people coming and going, but Claire was nowhere in sight. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to grasp at any explanation that didn't involve betrayal. Maybe it was a company event. Maybe she was meeting a friend. Maybe, and then I saw her, Claire, stepping out of the hotel with a man I didn't recognize. Their conversation was casual, easy, too familiar. She laughed at something he said, touching his arm lightly as they walked toward the parking lot. They didn't see me. They had no idea that I was watching as Claire leaned in, kissed him, and climbed into his car. My world didn't just crack in that moment. It shattered. There was no more room for doubt. No more excuses to cling to. She had betrayed me, and she had no idea that I knew. The moment I saw Claire kiss that man, something inside me shifted. The illusion I had clung to for years collapsed completely, leaving behind nothing but cold reality. But even as rage and betrayal coursed through me, I forced myself to stay composed. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before I made my next move. I drove home that night in silence, replaying the moment in my head over and over. Every detail mattered now. The way she touched him, the ease with which she leaned in for the kiss. This wasn't a mistake, wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was something else entirely. Something deliberate, something practiced. The next morning, Claire moved through our house as if nothing had changed. She kissed me lightly, sipped her coffee, scrolled through her phone like she always did. But I watched her more carefully now, noting every movement, every micro-expression. Did she look guilty? Was there hesitation in her touch? Or had she been lying for so long that deception came naturally to her now? It infuriated me that she could play the role of the devoted wife so effortlessly, knowing full well what she had done the night before. I didn't let on that I knew. Instead, I played my role perfectly, pretending to be the same trusting husband she had always known. If she suspected that I was onto her, she might change her behavior. I couldn't let that happen. I needed more evidence, something undeniable, something she couldn't talk her way out of. Over the next few days, I started gathering information. I checked her work calendar, noting when she claimed to be in meetings or working late. I cross-referenced those times with the tracker on her car. The inconsistencies piled up quickly. She wasn't where she said she was. Multiple times, she was at locations that had nothing to do with work. Restaurants, quiet bars, places where discretion was easy. It was like she wasn't even trying to cover her tracks completely, almost as if she believed she would never get caught. I accessed our phone records, something I had never once felt the need to do in all our years together. A single number appeared far too often. Calls at odd hours, long conversations, frequent texts. I saved the number, knowing I would need to find out exactly who it belonged to. I contemplated calling it, but I knew that would be reckless. Instead, I searched online databases, cross-checked it with social media profiles, anything that could give me a lead. I even started paying closer attention to her social media, something I had always ignored. There were little clues there, too. Comments from the same man, subtle interactions that now carried new meaning. Posts that seemed innocent before now looked calculated. Mentions of late nights. Inside jokes. Carefully worded messages that only made sense when viewed through the lens of betrayal. Knowing was one thing. Seeing it unfold in real time was something else entirely. One evening, Claire told me she had an important client meeting that would run late. I nodded, feigning understanding, and told her to take her time. As soon as she left, I followed. The tracker led me to a quiet restaurant on the other side of town. I parked at a distance, waiting, and then I saw them. Claire and the man, her lover. They sat at a corner table, leaning in close, whispering, touching. I took pictures, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. Then, just as I was about to leave, something unexpected happened. Another woman entered the restaurant, heading straight for their table. Claire looked up, surprised. The man stiffened. The woman sat down without invitation, her expression unreadable. I stayed longer than I intended, watching as the conversation unfolded. Claire seemed uncomfortable, the man uneasy. The woman spoke, her hands moving animatedly, and then, to my utter shock, she pulled out her phone and placed it on the table, showing them something that made Claire go pale. I needed to know who she was. More than that, I needed to know what she knew. There was something deeper at play here, something I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just me who was on to Claire. Someone else was, too. Later that night, Claire came home, quieter than usual. I asked her how her meeting went. She hesitated for the briefest moment before forcing a smile. said it was fine, said she was tired. Then she went straight to bed, her back to me. She had never done that before. The next morning, she was distant, distracted. Something had shaken her, and I had a feeling it wasn't just guilt. I had expected to be the only one chasing the truth. But now, it seemed I wasn't the only one watching Claire's every move. And I needed to find out why. The morning after Claire's unexpected reaction, I woke up with a deeper sense of urgency. Something had shaken her. Something beyond just my silent knowledge of her betrayal. The woman at the restaurant. The way she had confronted them. The way Claire had gone pale. There was something more to this story, something lurking beneath the surface. I wasn't just dealing with an unfaithful wife. I was dealing with secrets I hadn't even begun to uncover. And if I wanted the full picture, I had to start digging deeper than ever before. I spent the next few days retracing my steps, going over every piece of evidence I had gathered. Claire continued her usual routine, acting as though nothing was wrong, but I could see the cracks forming. She checked her phone more frequently, often stepping out of the room for calls. At night, I would catch her staring into space, lost in thought. Something had changed. I needed to find the woman from the restaurant. She was the missing piece. It took me hours of searching, but eventually, I found her. I ran the lover's number through a few databases and found a secondary number linked to the same account. That led me to an email and from their social media. Her name was Sophie, and she wasn't just some random person. She was Claire's lover's wife. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Sophie wasn't confronting Claire out of curiosity. She was a woman on a mission, just like me. I debated reaching out. Would she even want to speak to me? Would she see me as an ally, or as just another casualty in this mess? In the end, I decided I had nothing to lose. I sent a message. Short. Direct. I know what Claire and your husband are doing. I think we need to talk. The response came quicker than I expected. Time. Place. No hesitation. She was just as desperate for answers as I was. We met at a small cafe, far from where anyone would recognize us. When Sophie arrived, she looked like someone who had spent months carrying a secret too heavy to bear. Her expression was tired, her eyes sharp with determination. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out her phone, scrolling through messages, emails, pictures. Proof. The same kind I had gathered, only from the other side. Her husband, Jonathan, had been seeing Claire for nearly a year. It had started as harmless flirtation, quickly escalating into something deeper. They had their own routines, their own secret spots. Hotels, late-night meetings, even trips they had disguised as business travel. They had built an entire world behind our backs. I felt the anger rise again, but it wasn't just about Claire anymore. It was the sheer arrogance of it all. The way they had so confidently woven their lies, never once believing they would be caught. Then Sophie said something that made my blood run cold. I think this isn't just about an affair. I think they're hiding something bigger. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were financial records, large withdrawals, hidden accounts, transactions that didn't make sense. Claire had always handled most of our finances. I had trusted her with it. I never had a reason to question where our money was going. Until now. It wasn't just stolen moments in hotels. It was stolen money. Jonathan and Claire weren't just lovers. They were partners in something else entirely. Sophie leaned forward, her voice low. I don't think we're just dealing with cheaters. I think we're dealing with thieves. I felt my hands clench into fists. The betrayal had taken on a new shape, one that was far more dangerous than I had anticipated. Claire hadn't just been lying to me about her feelings. She had been lying about our entire life. As I stared at the documents, my mind began piecing things together. The missing money, the odd transactions, the places she had visited under the guise of business meetings. This was deliberate. It wasn't just infidelity, it was fraud. The implications of that realization hit me like a freight train. Sophie continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. I think they've been siphoning money for months, maybe longer. Offshore accounts, cash withdrawals, false expenses. And they've been careful. If I hadn't started digging, I never would have noticed. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My marriage hadn't just been a lie. It had been a cover. Claire had been using me, our finances, our stability, to fuel something far more sinister. I looked at Sophie, seeing the same mix of anger and determination in her eyes that I felt burning inside me. We weren't just two betrayed spouses anymore. We were victims of something larger, and we were going to make them pay. The revelation that Claire and Jonathan weren't just cheating, but orchestrating a financial scheme behind our backs, shifted everything. It wasn't just an affair. It was fraud, deception on a level I hadn't even imagined. I had spent weeks believing I was tracking a simple betrayal of trust, but now it was something else entirely. And Sophie and I weren't going to sit back and let them get away with it. After our meeting, Sophie and I kept in close contact. She had already started tracking Jonathan's financial moves, and I did the same for Claire. Every withdrawal, every unexplained transaction, every moment where money seemed to disappear, it all led to the same conclusion. They had been taking money from our accounts, diverting it elsewhere, but where? Offshore accounts? Another business venture? Or were they planning an escape? Late one evening, after Sophie and I compared notes, something alarming came to light. A joint business account under both their names had been set up months ago. I had never heard of it, and from the look on Sophie's face when I told her, neither had she. We managed to access what we could, tracing transactions that showed large cash withdrawals and transfers to unknown third parties. There was more at stake than just our marriages. They were playing a dangerous game, one that could have serious consequences for both of us if we didn't act fast. Neither of us wanted to act recklessly. If Claire and Jonathan had gone to such great lengths to hide this, there was a chance they would have an escape plan ready. If we tipped them off too soon, they could disappear before we had a chance to hold them accountable. Instead of confronting Claire directly, I started planting subtle traps. I left old bank statements in places she would see them, casually mentioned finances in conversation, watched for any reaction. She didn't seem to suspect anything at first, but over the next few days, I noticed her growing more tense. She started locking her phone more frequently, keeping her laptop shut whenever I entered the room. Sophie took a more aggressive approach. She let Jonathan believe she suspected nothing, but at the same time, she hired a private investigator to follow him. What he uncovered was even more damning. Jonathan had been meeting with a lawyer, making quiet inquiries about international transfers. They were preparing to run. Sophie and I decided we needed to act before they disappeared with our money, before they left us with nothing but shattered lives and legal nightmares. With the help of the investigator, we gathered everything: bank records, photos, documented meetings. Then we reached out to a lawyer of our own. The confrontation had to be perfect, public, unavoidable, something they couldn't talk their way out of. Sophie suggested we hit them where it would hurt the most, their professional lives. Claire and Jonathan had built reputations for themselves, respectable ones, and exposure would ruin them. So, we arranged for a meeting, posing as clueless spouses wanting to talk things through. We invited them both to dinner, pretending we were working on repairing our relationships. They didn't suspect a thing. The restaurant was upscale, elegant, a fitting backdrop for their downfall. Claire arrived first, all smiles, acting as though nothing had changed. Jonathan followed shortly after, his confidence evident. They truly believed they had won, that they had fooled us both. Sophie and I exchanged glances, our expressions unreadable. Then, just as they settled in, we laid everything out on the table. Literally. The bank records, the transfers, the offshore accounts. Everything we had uncovered. I watched as Claire's face drained of color, her carefully composed facade cracking. Jonathan tried to maintain his composure, but his fingers twitched, a dead giveaway of his rising panic. They had nowhere to run, and we weren't done yet. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. Before they could utter a word, I pressed play. A recording of Jonathan's conversation with his lawyer played loud enough for both of them to hear. He spoke of offshore transfers, fake expenses, and the plan to leave before anyone noticed the missing money. The blood drained from his face. Claire's hand trembled as she gripped her wine glass. Sophie leaned forward, her voice calm but deadly. We have everything. The investigators, the lawyers, this isn't just about us anymore. This is about what you've done. And there's no getting out of it. Claire turned to me, eyes wide, desperate. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not what you think." But I did understand. More than she realized. The restaurant had gone eerily quiet. Nearby diners now aware that something significant was happening. Jonathan and Claire had spent months weaving their deception, believing they would never be caught. But now, the walls were closing in, and their empire of lies was collapsing around them. Sophie stood, throwing a folder of documents onto the table. "We're pressing charges." Jonathan bolted up, shaking his head. "Wait, we can fix this." But there was no fixing it. No more lies. No more secrets. We had them trapped, and they knew it. Claire and Jonathan sat frozen, their carefully crafted web of lies unraveling before them. The restaurant, once filled with casual conversation and laughter, had fallen eerily silent. It was as if the entire room could sense the gravity of the moment. The evidence was undeniable. Their crimes laid bare, and for the first time, I saw true fear in Claire's eyes. Jonathan was the first to react, his mind clearly racing to find an escape. His fingers twitched against the table, his face draining of color. "This isn't what it looks like," he muttered, his voice low, almost a whisper. Sophie scoffed, shaking her head. "It's exactly what it looks like." She pushed the final document forward, a signed agreement between Claire and Jonathan, detailing their siphoning of funds into the offshore account. "We have bank records, we have witness testimony, and we have your lawyer on recording discussing your exit strategy." Claire turned to me, her face contorted in something between desperation and anger. "You set me up," she said, her voice trembling. I finally allowed myself a small, humorless smile. "No," I said calmly. "You did this to yourself." She opened her mouth as if to protest, but what could she say? The truth was in front of her, undeniable and merciless. By the time Claire and Jonathan left the restaurant, they knew their world was collapsing. Sophie and I had already filed a lawsuit against them, freezing their assets before they could make any sudden moves. We had informed the authorities, ensuring that their fraudulent activity would not be swept under the rug. Their joint business account had been flagged for suspicious transactions, meaning they would have to answer for every dollar they had stolen. Claire tried calling me that night. I didn't answer. The next morning, a lawyer reached out on her behalf, begging for a private conversation to settle things amicably. I refused. There was nothing to settle. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about lies, deception, and the audacity to think they could get away with it. Sophie, on the other hand, was dealing with her own battle. Jonathan had all but abandoned his attempts at reconciliation, focusing instead on damage control. But there was nothing left to salvage. Sophie had filed for divorce immediately, ensuring he would walk away with nothing. Even with all the legal victories stacking up, the weight of betrayal still lingered. It wasn't something that could be erased overnight. For years, I had trusted Claire, believed in our marriage, shared my dreams with her. And now all of it felt like a lie. The house felt different now, emptier. It wasn't just the absence of Claire's things. It was the realization that the person I had built my life with had never truly been who I thought she was. Sophie and I kept in touch. At first, it was through necessity, ensuring our legal strategies remained aligned. But over time, the conversations became easier, lighter. She understood the pain, the anger, the exhaustion that came with betrayal. One evening, months later, she invited me out for coffee. It wasn't anything grand, just a quiet moment between two people who had survived something terrible together. Claire and Jonathan's legal troubles deepened. Investigations uncovered even more misappropriated funds, leading to full-blown criminal charges. Their attempt to outsmart the system had backfired spectacularly, and now they were both facing the possibility of jail time. Their once promising futures had turned into nothing but a cautionary tale. And as for me, I was free. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under the weight of someone else's deception. I wasn't clinging to a love that no longer existed or questioning my own worth because of someone else's mistakes. I had been broken, yes, but now I was rebuilding. On my own terms. I took a deep breath, stepping out onto my back porch as the sun set over the horizon. The air was crisp, the world silent. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever it was, it would be mine to create.